So we're going to explore a different type of brush now. We're going to use an insert mesh brush. If I go to B for brush, I for insert, there's a variety of brushes here called IMM. Now, a lot of these are things like costume elements, straps, buttons, machine gun parts, things like this we're not going to use with Dynamesh. These are more for inserting hard surface pieces and parts together. There is an IMMB parts, which we may use in a moment, but what we're interested in right now is IMM primitives, this brush here. So if I select that brush at the top of my screen now, I'll have a selection of primitive shapes. I want to select the insert sphere. I'll take my brush, bring the two dots together, and then click and drag, and that draws a sphere. Now you'll notice that it's masked the rest of my model. That allows me to take the sphere and start to manipulate it. So if I press the W key, that brings up this gizmo, and this might look familiar. It looks like a move, scale, rotate gizmo in any other program. You get that by pressing W, E, or R. So when you're in draw mode, if you press move, scale, or rotate, the hotkeys are W, E, or R, you'll get this gizmo. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that it's not sitting in the center of the object. It's sitting in the center of both objects. So I'm going to click this button here that goes to unmasked mesh centers. That centers that on the sphere, but I have X symmetry turned on. So it's not in the center, it's in the center of one side. So if I turn off X symmetry and hit unmasked mesh center, that centers that gizmo. If I unlock the gizmo and reset it, then lock it again, now the gizmo will have the orientation locked to the screen axis. If I want to move the pivot, hold the Alt key and just click on any of the corners. If I want to move the object, I can click on the corners and move them. I can rotate them and scale them. And we're just going to create a rib cage here. So I'm just going to scale this down, scale it like this, bring it down to about here, and then go back to Q for draw, turn my X symmetry back on, make sure that I have the move brush selected. And we're just going to create a rib cage here. The rib cage is kind of like an egg that's tipped in space. I'll take the standard brush, hold down the Alt key, and I'll carve out the thoracic arch. That's the border, the rib cage down here. Maybe we'll take the clay tubes brush and sort of build up the volumes of the rib cage a little bit. I'll take my standard brush and hold down the Alt key, and I'll create the sort of hollow down the back where the spine would sit. I'll take my move brush again and just make sure that it's sort of meeting the neck. I'll invert my mask, and now I can move the neck and bring it down and meet the rib cage with it. So this is going to let me invert my mask just by control clicking on the background. And I just want to get general shape of the rib cage here. There we go. And make sure that it's egg shape from the back as well. I just want to get a really generalized torso shape here. That's all we're interested in. There we go. Maybe go back to my clay tubes brush and just build up the sternum just a little bit. There we go. Now, if I go to frame mode, that insert mesh is a separate object. You see, it doesn't even have the same sort of poly count. If I control click and drag once, that clears the mask off the head. Control click and drag a second time, and it's going to glue these parts together. Looks like here that my Dynamesh got turned off at some point. Sometimes that happens. Let's see if I can't undo back and see at what point that actually got turned off. So if it's too far back, then we'll just turn it back on. You'll also see it's kind of baked the faceting in, but that's fine. Hold down the Shift key and you can smooth it away. We're going to sculpt over it anyway, so the faceting doesn't matter. So now we've got the beginnings of our torso. I'll take my move brush and start to make some changes here. Bring this back. There we go. I just want to get that nice tipping of that rib cage there. Now let's put an abdomen on here. B for brush, I for insert, I am in primitives. Select insert sphere, bring the two dots together and draw a new sphere. This will be the abdomen. W for move, go to the unmasked mesh center. We'll just bring this down, switch back to our move brush, and now we're just going to create an abdomen here. I'm just going to build up where the hip bone will eventually be. Narrow that waist a little bit. Bring those abdominal muscles up. And we'll deal with the back now. Let's pull this back. Control, click, and drag twice to execute Dynamesh, and it will blend those together. So if we go to frame mode, they're blended together. Now you may notice that each individual part has a different color. So on the poly frame button here, if I turn off line, it'll just show the color coding. We don't have to see the geometry. These color-coded sections are called polygroups. It's just a quick and easy way to isolate your portions of your mesh. So if I Control-Shift-Click on the blue polygroup, it hides everything else. If I Control-Shift-Click and drag on the background, it will invert that visibility. If I Control-Shift-Tap on the background, it reveals all again. Now, when I Control-Shift-Click, I get this green rectangle. That's my visibility marquee. If I press the space bar, I can move it around. Everything inside of that will be visible. Everything outside will be invisible. If I Control-Shift-Click and drag again, it inverts that visibility. Control-Shift-Tap, it reveals all again. If I Control-Shift-Click and drag and then press Alt, it will hide whatever's inside that rectangle. Control-Shift-Click reveals all again. So I'm just going to make a couple little changes here and undo that. And my focal shift got messed up there. There we go. Let's take our move brush, maybe pull these shapes up on the head. I want to give a little bit more height to the head. I think I want to scallop in those cheekbones a little bit more, maybe narrow the mouth and the jaw and sort of lengthen the face a little bit. That's pretty neat. Do something like this. I'm going to turn polyframe off so I don't have to look at the color. I'm just doing a couple little changes to the face. Go back to my clay tubes brush, BCT. And I'm just going to bring those neck muscles down to about here, because that's where my clavicles or my collarbones are going to be. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm thinking about where those neck muscles are. I don't want to get too specific with them yet. I'm just sort of sketching them in so I remember that that's where they're going. And I can take the smooth brush and sort of knock that back a little bit with some smoothing. So let's go ahead and save our work. So let's go back to B for brush, I for insert, and select our IMM primitives brush again. Select the sphere, and we're just going to add 2 spheres for shoulders here. Now, once again, it masks everything else, so I can take the W key to get my gizmo, and I can just move these spheres down to about where the shoulders would be. Press the Q key, so we're back into sculpting mode. So W, E, and R, those 3 hotkeys will bring up this gizmo. Q will bring us back into sculpting mode. So I'll just rotate around to the back, take my move brush, BMV for the move brush, and then let's shape the scapulas here, the shoulder blades. So we're going to do just a little bit of shorthand, and we're going to do the scapulas and the shoulders, and maybe a little bit of the clavicle out of these spheres. Just want to start to suggest these shapes here. We go to the top view, and I just want to make sure that I get the shape of that clavicle. Now I'm going to smooth this by holding down the shift key, and that'll just sort of distribute those edges a little bit better. So I've got a little bit more geometry to play with here to move around. Turn my draw size up and just lower these shoulders and come up here. And I'm just going to pull these faces up and then pull them in so they're intersecting the body. Now Control, click, and drag once clears the mask. Control, click, and drag a second time executes Dynamesh so that actually merges everything together. So we'll go back to our clay tubes brush and just do a little bit of sculpting through here. I'm not going to get too caught up in the details of the anatomy yet. I'm just kind of suggesting where these shapes are. I want to fix this little bump right there in the neck, just holding down the Alt key to kind of narrow that down a little bit. And let's go ahead and take the move brush and just adjust these shoulders a little bit. There we go. So we're going to use a different insert brush now. I'm going to go to B for brush, I for insert, and there's an insert brush here called IMMB parts. And if I select that, you see this is a selection of body parts. So if I grab the arm here, there's male full arm, click and drag, that draws an arm on there. Now it's masked the rest of the body, so I can press W for the gizmo. And if I click the go to unmasked mesh center, it'll center it there, and I can just position these arms where I need them to come out of the body. So let's scale them up a little bit, maybe scale them down. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and I'm going to change the object pivot, bring them here. And then just rotate these. Now this white circle here rotates around my current view. The red, blue, and green circles correspond to the X, Y, and Z axis. So if I'm snapped to a side view like this, I can just rotate this white circle, and then I know that that's going to rotate around that particular view. And I'm just using the move brush to sort of intersect the arms with the body. And I want to make sure that I don't neglect the armpit here. I want to make sure that the body or the arm doesn't just grow out of the body like a tree trunk. I want to make sure that we've got the depth of the armpit there. And the pectoralis muscle will cover this whole area. So I'm going to clear the mask and then execute Dynamesh. Now if we go to frame mode, you see that that's merged together. Let's turn the lines on. But it's just baked in those facets, but that's not a problem. Again, we can just sort of smooth those over, and we'll be detailing on top of that, so it doesn't really matter. Plus, we're going to chop this off as a bust because we're going to add the body in a later chapter. So I don't want to overwhelm you with an entire figure right in the QuickStart. So let's go to the Clay Tubes brush. And then let's revisit these clavicles. There's a little sweep of the clavicles there. Now I need to traverse this space right here with the pectoralis muscles, so I'll just go back to the insert primitives, grab the insert sphere. We'll just put two spheres here, take the transpose gizmo, move them back in space. Now the gizmo is kind of sitting in a weird position. I'm going to click, go to unmasked mesh center here, so that'll put it in the unmasked mesh center. Scale it down in the Z axis. Let me actually undo that. I think I got the wrong axis there. There we go. Scale that down. And then take the move brush. And basically, we're just going to create a pectoralis muscle out of this. We're just going to stretch it back to where it needs to go. So I can just turn my brush size up. And I've got the rest of the model masked right now by default, so I can just use the Clay Tubes brush to kind of build up this pectoralis muscle. Maybe I want to thicken it a little bit. I'll go to B for brush, I for inflate, and select the inflate brush, and we can sort of thicken this, give ourselves a little bit more geometry to work with, and then smooth that back. Take the move brush and just bring this up to the sternum here, and then just bring this back so it's actually tucking under the deltoid muscle there. We just want to make sure that we've got the pectoralis in place. So here where that's sort of interpenetrating, I can always invert my mask by control clicking on the background and just push those faces back. Control click on the background again to invert my mask again. I can continue to sort of finesse that pectoralis muscle. I want that to come up a little bit higher. And that's going to be the front wall of the armpit, as you can see here. So we want to make sure that we get that negative space up underneath there. That's a really common mistake people make. Control, click, and drag twice executes Dynamesh. Now, if you ever try and execute Dynamesh like we did earlier and it doesn't work, you just need to turn Dynamesh back on. Every once in a while, you might just accidentally turn it off. It's one of those things that happens. Doesn't happen often, but it might. This often happens. Remember, Control S is your save hotkey. So if I press Control S, I will be saving. if you accidentally press Shift S, I'll show you what happens. Let's save my file here. So it's saving the project, it's saving the undo history. Oftentimes you may accidentally hit Shift S, and Shift S is the hotkey for snapshot. And in all my time teaching ZBrush, I've really seen this crop up for people a whole lot when they first start out. Something like this happens, where you've got a copy of your model stuck on the background. It's like I said at the beginning, that's just pixels on screen. Control N will clear that. So anytime you have something that's sort of stuck on screen like this, like you might have a situation like this, where the model seems to be stuck on screen and you can see if you look down here, you can see the editable model is behind it. Just Control N clears everything off the canvas and leaves just your editable mesh. So let's go back to our clay tubes brush and we'll start thinking about those abdominals, rib cage. Now, of course, like I said, we are going to focus just on the bust, but I want to, since it's here, I'm going to sculpt it. That way, when we sort of slice it off, we're not slicing off it sort of an unfinished model. It gives us a nice transitional area that we can later on match the rest of our sculpting to. So I'm thinking about the deltoid here, and I'm just using the clay tubes brush with no alpha, bringing that deltoid up along the spine of the scapula right there. That's that bony landmark right there. Right here, we've got the teres major and minor. Those are the muscles that come off the scapula and form the back wall of the armpit there. And I'll fill out the lateral oblique here. Comes around to the sides of the body like that. Let's get that rib cage back in there. There we go. So being able to sort of block in just what we call kit bashing, taking parts like body parts and bashing them together like this is a really great way to start a creature or a character. And it's definitely nothing wrong with it because you're still going to be doing quite a bit of sculpting on it. It's not like you're just going to put something together from generic low resolution body parts. Oops, I need to make sure that I've actually got my move brush. There we go. And I'm just going to adjust some of these shapes a little bit. Now, let's say I want to change some of my proportions here because, like, you know, the torso is too short and the head is too far back. Maybe I want to change some of this stuff. So this is where the masking marquee will come in. If I control, click, and drag on the background, I get this rectangle. Just like when I control, shift, click, and drag, I get the view show rectangle. Control, click, and drag gives me a masking marquee. Now, while I hold the control key, watch my brush palette right here. It changes to the mask pen. So if I click this, now that changes to just my masking brushes. So I'm going to go to Mask Lasso. Now what this does is it lets me draw a lasso for a mask. So I can lasso mask the head, neck, and shoulders. Invert that, control click on the masked area to sort of feather it out. Now what I'd like to do is sort of move this forward a little bit because it's a little bit too far back. So I'm going to go to the transpose gizmo, go to unmasked mesh center. I want to unlock it and then reset it so the axis is pointing straight forward. So let's do this. And then I'll just scoot that head forward a little bit like this. Now, obviously, that's going to create a problem here. So I can just go back to my move brush and just manually scoot these things back. Don't be too precious with everything at this stage. It's very loose. It's very much a sketch. And feel empowered to just be bold and move stuff around. A lot of times I see new users being really careful, like doing stuff like this and try and avoid that. Use kind of a medium-sized brush like I am and really get in here and sort of be bold because you can always undo. You can always backtrack. You've got your undo history and it's going to help you with your speed and your confidence if you just kind of run with it and sort of, it's like, you know, when I was first learning to draw in school, I spent a lot of time, like maybe a year or two, being really careful with my drawings. And it finally kind of clicked for me because my professors kept pushing the point home to draw loose and big and draw with your arm and then refine it as you go, refine it later. Don't try and make every mark perfect right out of the gate. And that was really liberating and it really, really helped. And I find the same in ZBrush. I find being able to come through here and I'm just making bold lines here. Like there's my tricep muscle. There's my elbow and my bicep and pectoralis. And some of this comes from the confidence of just knowing the general anatomical shapes, but you can still, you know, a lot of these. We know them because we live with them and we see them every day. So kind of trust your eye. And also something I'd like to mention about anatomy. I've spent a lot of time sort of just as a personal passion, just like studying anatomy because I find it fascinating and I wanted to learn as much about it as I could. And what I've come to realize over the years is the most important thing is not, of course, the name of the muscles. It's not even necessarily, well, I don't want to say their shape. That is important. But the most important thing, I think, if I had to go back in time and tell past me something to learn, I would always learn the origin right here, or actually the origin here of the pectoralis and the insertion of each big muscle shape. So that might not be individual muscles. I'm going to hold down the control key and go back to the mask pen. So there's the insertion and there's the origin of the pectoralis. And the pectoralis is actually 3 different heads. The abdominals, you know, there's the rectus abdominis and there's some deep layer muscles there. You know, I would learn the origin and the insertion. Because if you take your brushes and sort of, like if I take my damn standard brush, and if you sort of stroke in the direction of the origin and the insertion, it's going to actually give you a kind of a believable look. It's going to get you pretty far. So that's something to be aware of, that you don't have to like feel sort of disempowered, like, oh, I've really got to work on anatomy and learn anatomy. Well, yeah, we all do. You never finish that journey. But I think you can actually make your life a little bit easier if you kind of focus on the big, most important elements. George Bridgman is a really good author on figure drawing that drives those points home. So I want to change some proportions here because I don't, you know, the torso is too short. So I'm going to go ahead and mask here. And I'm going to feather that mask just by manually painting it through here. I don't need it to be quite so sharp. Control click. And I'm going to extend this down to get this portion of the rib cage. Transpose gizmo, go to unmasked mesh center, and just stretch that down a little bit. And we're going to stretch this a little bit more. There we go. And I'm going to hold down the Alt key and move this. Oops. Hold down the Alt key. There we go. Move that down. Maybe give it a little rotation, a little pull back, just to give a little bit of curvature to the body there. There we go. Clear the mask and execute Dynamesh. So let's go ahead and go back to our clay tubes brush. Start to sketch some of these shapes in. Think about the serratus muscles here. I'm going to fill this transition out. That would be, again, the lateral oblique muscle coming around here. There we go. And let's take a look at the head here. I'm going to use my lasso, my mask lasso again. I'm going to mask the head out. And go to a side view, and I'm just going to make sure that I've got the whole thing masked here up to the neck. And I am going to take the transpose gizmo, go to the unmasked mesh center. Let's turn off X symmetry and put it right to the center of the head there. And maybe I want to give a little bit of length to that head. I just want to lengthen that a little bit. And I'm going to move the pivot to the base of the skull. And I just want to tilt that head back a little bit. So it's got a bit of more of a, it's held back with a bit more pride. And I'd like to play around with some of these shapes here. So like I said, I had an idea where there's like these star shapes of spines coming out of the head. So I want to get rid of these horns. So this gives us an opportunity to talk about how to delete things out of a Dynamesh model. So if I go to B for brush, S for select, and here we've got select lasso and select rectangle. Select rectangle is the default visibility behavior. That's where I hold down Control Shift, click and drag, and I get this marquee. If I do select lasso, it asks me if I want to replace that brush. I'll just say skip this note, Control Shift, click, drag, and now I get this lasso. And what I can do is I can lasso out those bits there and hide them. Then I can, if you see there's a hole there, I can go to Geometry, Modify Topology, Delete Hidden, and then Execute Dynamesh, and it will fill the hole. Now, another way that we can chop things off of a mesh is if we go to B for Brush, T for Trim, and do the Trim Curve or Trim Circle. I'll do Trim Curve. If I Control Shift Click and Drag, now I get this line instead of that marquee or that lasso. Everything on the dotted, or everything on the feathered edge of that line will be cut away. Everything on the dotted edge stays. So if I do this, it will slice that away. Now, the problem with this is it doesn't always work with X symmetry. So that's something to bear in mind. As you see here, the previous one did not work symmetrically, and that one does not work symmetrically. So something to bear in mind that may be a limitation for you. I'm going to go to B for Brush, S for Select, L for Lasso. So I'm going to take the Move brush and just sort of play around with this. I like the idea of these being maybe straight spines. I'm going to get rid of this entirely just by deleting it. I'm going to hide that. Go to Modify Topology, Delete Hidden, and then Execute Dynamesh by Control clicking and dragging on the background. Go back to our Clay Tubes brush, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and that just sort of planes back these shapes here. I'm going to build out the back of the head again. So I still feel like that head has just sort of stayed a little too narrow. So let's go to our Clay Tubes brush and give the cranium a little bit more mass. And if I end up losing the ears here, I'm not too terribly worried about that. I'm more concerned about getting a good overall sort of skull shape here towards what I'm looking for. So I'm just going to pull this back. Profile has gone too flat, so I'm going to go back to my masking controls, and I'm going to change the mask pen. I'm going to mask out the cheekbone and eye area, invert that mask, take my Move brush, and then pull that forward. Dial this back, clear my mask, and I'm going to mask this portion here. It's a little bit dopey right now. I want to fix that, so I'm going to mask this, and I want to bring this bit forward. Let's go ahead and unmask this area here. Bring that jaw back again, or forward, I mean to say. Again, bring that nasal bone out, maybe down a little bit. Clear my mask. Use my Move brush to pull these shapes out. And I'm going to mask in the eye socket here. And I'm just going to bring these shapes into more of an angle. And go back to my Clay Tubes brush and just sort of fill out these shapes here. Now my head has kind of gotten too big, so what I'll do is I'll mask the head out. This is doing an auto save right now. ZBrush will save into your quick save folder as you're working. So if you have a system crash, usually there's going to be a quick save. If you just go to Lightbox, quick save, you'll find one of your quick saves here. So you can usually get back pretty close to where you were before the crash. So I'm just going to mask everything, mask the whole head here, invert that mask. And I'm going to go to the Transpose Gizmo. That's still at the base of the skull. And I just want to dial down the size of the head here a little bit. It got a bit too big. There we go. That feels better. Sometimes when you're focused in working on one particular part of the model, it can grow. It can kind of, you're spending too much time thinking about that one particular thing. So it starts to sort of take precedence over everything else and literally gets bigger than all the other pieces and parts. So let's go take our Clay Tubes brush. And I'm just thinking about the cheeks here, that jaw muscle. And then let's go ahead and start putting those spikes in there that I'm thinking about. So I'm going to go to B for brush, I for insert, and we'll use an insert mesh. And I'll just go back to our primitives here. And spheres are easy. I'll just grab the insert sphere and add 2 spheres right here. Go to the transpose gizmo, let's unlock it, reset it, lock it again, and then we will just scale them out like this, and then move them back into position like this. Maybe scale them down like this. There we go. And I will move my pivot back here and just give them a little bit of a rotation back. And let's see, let's go ahead and give them a bit of a taper. Now here's something we can do. We can click the gizmo, and there's all these deformers here. If I click taper, it gives me these cones. If I take this cone and pull it back like this, I can taper this. And then if I adjust this white cone, I can adjust how that taper occurs along the length of that shape. Now if I press the gear again, you see there's the taper modifier, click accept, and now that's applied that to that primitive. So there we go. I'm just going to take these two sort of horns, I should say. I'm going to make this sort of starburst shape in the skull. So I'm happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and merge those. So I've now Dynameshed those together. Now something we could do, if I undo that before the Dynamesh, let's zoom back into that so we can see it. Go to Shift F. So this has not been Dynameshed yet. Something we can do is if we hold down the Control key, click and drag, it will duplicate everything that's unmasked. So right now, I'm going to undo back before I cleared the masking. So if I Control, click, and drag, that's now duplicated those inserts. So if I take my Alt key, move the pivot over here, change that orientation like this, snap to a side view, maybe I want to rotate these back and then pull them back in space like this. Let's turn off frame mode so we can see it a little bit better. We're starting to see that sort of starburst pattern that I was thinking of. I'm going to unlock the gizmo and reset it so I can just move them right out along the x-axis like this. So I'm pretty happy with that generally. We'll finesse it further, but I'm going to Control, click, and drag twice. Once to clear the mask, once to execute Dynamesh. And there we go. So we've Dynameshed those pieces together, and I can take my clay tubes brush and maybe just sort of sculpt along these. Perhaps I want to join these together a little bit with kind of a bit of, not webbing, but I want there to be like scalloping there. So I'll just do this. Now I want to do another one that runs straight down from the nose up into a spike going up the head. So I'm going to do B for brush, I for insert. Go back to my primitives, grab the sphere, and just bring the two dots together, and we'll just draw a new sphere here. Now if I keep stretching it up and down like this, I can sort of stretch it as I'm drawing it. Go to my gizmo, rotate that, and if you hold down the Shift key, that rotation will snap to increments. So we can scale this, and let's bring that up, maybe rotate that back. And we could put a taper on this as well if we wanted to. We just turn on the taper deformer. We can taper that down and then adjust the fall off on it. So that's kind of nice like that. Hit the gear and click accept. Now, if I hold down the Alt key and move my pivot down here, maybe I want to make this much, much taller. So we can do that. And then in the silhouette, I want this to be more of a straight up and down. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and I'm going to snap that straight up and down a little bit. And I'm going to scale this in the Z axis, move this back because I kind of want this to meet that nasal bone like this. I'm going to take my move brush and just manually pull this down so it's meeting the nasal bone like that. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and Control, click, and drag twice, and that will Dynamesh those pieces together. And there we go. Now I'll take my move brush and just do a little bit of tinkering. Oops, undo that. Make sure my X symmetry is turned on. Let's do a little bit of tinkering with that nasal bone. Bring that out. We do a little bit of jagginess to this sort of head blade. Maybe I want to continue that sort of join with the back of the head, like there's a sort of a ridge back here. So I'll just fill in this transitional area here and then execute Dynamesh. And we can smooth that back a little bit. Do another one here where it's basically just filling out, almost like there's striations coming back here. I'll take the standard brush and hold down the Alt key and just sort of carve out some hollows in there. We'll take the standard brush, maybe run a ridge up each one of these. I want to be careful that it doesn't start looking like the Statue of Liberty, but I'll take my dam standard brush. B for brush, D for dam, S for standard. So I've got my dam standard, and we can start to kind of create some shapes here. And I'm once again going to just sort of etch in where that mouth is going to be. Now let's talk about subtools. Now what I want to do is I want to put some teeth in here, and I want to put some eyes in here. Now the eyes we're going to create in ZBrush using spheres. The teeth I've saved out as a different Z tool that you can load up. It's available for you in the downloads for this particular lesson. So I'm going to save my work before we move on. So Control S to save a project. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add the eyes. So what are subtools? Subtools are a way of grouping multiple Z tools together so they rotate together and they stay in orientation with one another. That allows you to put costumes on a character and the costume stays in position with the character. Or it allows you to put eyeballs into a head and those eyes stay in relation to the head as you move around. Subtools are here under the tool menu, subtool. So currently we don't have any subtools on this particular Z tool. But if I go to the Lightbox, Tools, and open up, for example, the Demo Soldier, the Demo Soldier has multiple subtools. These are all subtools, and each one of these is a separate Z tool with its own poly count. Some of these could be Dynameshed, others could have subdivision levels. They could have their own poly paint or their own texture map. They've all got their own parameters that are all controlled under this tool menu here. So for example, if you see the geometry menu here, if I select the boots are now the selected subtool. You see they become lighter in the view here, and they have 3 subdivision levels. The knee pads, on the other hand, have no subdivision levels. The wristbands have no subdivisions. The gloves have 3. So subtools allow you to group things together, group subtools or Z tools together as subtools, so they stay in relationship to one another. So let's go back to our creature and let's just drop some eyeballs in here. So I will go to the subtool menu and I can turn down my visible count so I don't have that big blank space there. There's an append button here. This is how I append a subtool into a Z tool. If you click that, you see it brings up the tool menu. Now I want to select a polysphere. Be very careful that you don't select Sphere 3D. This is actually not the tool you want because Sphere 3D has triangles in the topology. I want another polysphere like the one I used to start the creature. So I will go to Lightbox, Tool, and double-click Polysphere. Now it looks like I've lost my monster, but he's still here. He's just no longer the active Z tool. So if I click on the creature again, now there's a polysphere sitting there in my tool palette. If I go to Append, I can now select that, and that drops that into the subtool stack. So if I want to select a subtool, I can click on it in the menu here, and you see whatever is the active tool lights up. Another easier way to do that is if you alt-click on a tool here in the view, it will select it. Now, that sphere is probably sitting inside the character, so I'll select it, and if I turn on transparency, I can see through the subtool to my active tool. There it is inside the head, like I thought. So I'll take the transpose gizmo, move it off to the side, scale it down. Let's turn transparency off. And I'm just going to place it in the eye socket so we've got an eyeball that we can work with. Let's bring this forward. And let's scale it down. Maybe bring it up just a little bit. And there we go. So now we've got one eyeball subtool. But I need to mirror that across. I need to have another eyeball. Luckily, we can do that very easily by going to Z plugin, Subtool Master, and press the mirror button. We want to merge the two eyeballs into one subtool. So instead of having two separate eyeball subtools, it will mirror it across and then merge it into one subtool. And we want to merge it across the x-axis. So click OK, and there we go. We now have two eyeballs as a subtool. So before we start sculpting the areas around the eyes, let's get the teeth in there because it's going to help us kind of see the character of the face and continue working. So the teeth we're going to load up as a separate subtool. We need to go to Tool, Load Tool, because those are saved out on disk. So let's do that now. So to load the teeth, we're going to go to Load Tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just reduce the size of my ZBrush interface so you can actually see what happens here. I go to Load Tool, and it will open up a file load screen. I'll bring that over onto the main window. And here you see I've got teeth2.ztl. So if I double click that, it's going to load this Z tool. And if I press F for focus, it'll focus in on those teeth. Now these teeth have some poly paint on there, and we'll learn about poly paint a bit later. If we want to turn off the color, we'll just turn off the paintbrush here, and that will just show the gray shaded version of the model. Now we'll go back to the body. Now you can see these are two different scales. So I will click Append, bring those teeth in. Now if I select the Teeth subtool and press F for focus, there they are. But they're not the same size as the body, so I need to get these to be around the same size so I can scale them and place them. The easiest way to do that is to go down to the deformation menu here. There's a Unify button. If I press that Unify button and then F for focus, you can see the teeth are now sitting at origin inside the head. So we'll turn on the transpose gizmo, unlock it, reset it, then lock it again, and we can just move these into position. Now once we've got teeth and eyes in here, it's going to be a bit easier to kind of relate to the figure and start bringing a bit more character into it. So I want to bring the teeth forward a little bit, and I'm going to match the lips to them about here. I think that's a good size for them. So we'll go back to draw mode by pressing the Q key, select the head, and if I turn on transparency, I can see through those teeth now. And I'll go to my move brush, BMV, and let's just hold down the Alt key and click, and we can pull those lips out around those teeth. Let's turn transparency off. And then we'll just start to adjust these so it feels like those lips are kind of pulled back over those gums a little bit. Bring that nasal bone out a little bit, narrow that, revisit all those pieces. But I just want to start getting a little bit more form and character in these areas. So I'll switch back to my clay tubes brush. That's BCT. And then let's build these cheekbones out. Bring that jawline out. And I think I'd like to stretch that bottom of the face out again too. So I'm going to narrow that jaw and bring this down. Bring the chin down a little bit. And I'm going to mask out the nose and the eyes and a bit of the cheekbones here. Take my move brush and then just stretch all this down. Select the teeth, go to transpose, and just pull them down a little bit. So we've got a little bit more distance there. There we go. That's feeling a little bit better. Alt-click on the body to select that subtool again. We can clear our mask. And then I'm just going to adjust the transition from the cheekbone, like so. Now I'm going to turn on transparency so I can see through the eye subtool, and I'm going to take the clay tubes brush and just sort of build up all these faces that are underneath the eye, just so I can give myself a little bit of geometry to work with to create kind of an aperture for the eye here. B for brush, D for dam, S for standard, And I'm just going to go ahead and push these faces in. Let's turn off transparency. And you see that we're going to reveal the eye by pushing those faces in and revealing those eyes. Take the clay tubes brush, fill in some of that crease in there. We bring that brow down a little bit. I'm going to mask out this whole eye area and just sort of tinker with the transition between the brow and the eye socket. I'm going to mask this whole center portion here because I want to get a little bit of compression, like that brow is sort of furrowed. So let's mask this out, unmask this little area that I accidentally masked, and then I'm just going to take the move brush and just slide these faces over, get a little bit of a frown there. And let's just bring that whole brow forward so it's a bit heavier and a little bit more intense. And let's mask out this whole eye area again. Control click to invert the mask, and I'm going to go to the transpose gizmo again and go to the unmasked mesh center. And I just want to give a little bit of an angle to that. I'm just going to tilt those just like so. Clear the mask. Go with my clay tubes brush, fill in some of that detail or that recess there. Fill in this recess through here. Go back to my damn standard brush. And I'm just working into that eyelid area. Now with the damn standard brush, if I hold the Alt key down, it gives a nice pinched, raised edge, which is really good for the edges of the eyelids there. And I'm going to accentuate that eye socket. Let's bring that down a little bit. Bring that clay tubes brush up to here. And bring our move brush. Let's mask the eye out so we're not going to impact these faces. So you'll notice that I really start to use the masking heavily now. And I'm a big proponent that masking is absolutely necessary to get the best possible result when you're sculpting. If you don't mask, then you can't really control the surface in the same way as you would otherwise. So get accustomed to using these masking tools sooner than later because they're a big part of getting the best possible result in ZBrush. So let's narrow this bit of bone here, bring this angle down, bring this up and out maybe. Get a little bit more of an aggressive shape here. And let's execute Dynamesh. You see this whole eye area will then rebuild. So there we go. Now I'm going to go to my draw menu, and the default camera focal distance is set to 50. I'm going to turn this back to 28. Just gives me a little bit more perspective and can make things feel a little bit more sort of dynamic. So I'm going to start tinkering around with some of these relationships between the neck and the head. I'm still not really happy with how straight up and down that neck is, but I will revisit that. So I'm going to mask out this portion of the sort of head spines. I'm going to invert that mask, and I just want to straighten that again. So I'm going to take the transpose line, go to the unmasked mesh center, unlock it, reset it, lock it again, and just move that forward. Maybe give it a little bit of a rotation here. And then execute Dynamesh. Do a little bit of smoothing here, and then B for brush, T for trim, and let's do a trim curve. So I'm going to Control, Shift, click and drag, double tap the Alt key to create a hard angle here, and I'm going to drag, oops, I accidentally clicked. So we'll just have to undo that because it's probably not going to cut the right direction. My hand slipped on my pen, so let's let that finish. Undo, and then Control, Shift, click and drag, double tap the Alt key, and then we'll just bring this angle up. Now I can hold the space bar down and I can move this so I can get just the right angle there. And that should slice right along there. There we go. Now I'm going to mask the back ends of these. I'm just going to take the masking brush. I'm just going to mask along here. invert that mask, take my clay tubes brush, and I'm just going to build that up real aggressively. Do a little bit of smoothing, build it up, do a bit of smoothing. Maybe take the inflate brush and just inflate these. And I've got too much mask here, so I'm going to undo some of that mask. Just clear that out. Do a little bit of smoothing here. There we go. Clay tubes brush. I just want to fill that whole area in and then execute Dynamesh. There we go. And then we'll just do a bit more. Oops, undo that. Do a bit more inflate right here. Execute Dynamesh. And then we'll smooth that back. And I'll go to B for brush, P for pinch, I. That gives me the pinch brush here, and I just want to pinch this sort of ridge here. If I hold down the Alt key, the pinch brush will pinch in and create a little crevice right there. There we go. I don't want to get too caught up in any particular area. I'm just going to keep working my way around and sort of picking out little bits of shadow here and there. Hold down the Alt key with that damn standard brush, and I can crease or pinch that up into a raised ridge. Now I'd like to transition these areas together, so I'm going to take the clay tubes brush and sort of join this bone structure of the temporal ridge up into that spike on the head there. Let's build that out and then execute Dynamesh. So now things are starting to come together a bit better. I want to transition this up into a curve going up into the head there. So if I go into frame mode, you can see that this actually has a polygroup. So I can Control-Shift-Click on it to isolate it, Control-Click to mask it, Control-Shift-Click again to reveal all. And now I'm going to turn off frame mode. So this central piece is now masked. So I can bring these portions up here and sort of get this interesting starburst shape like this. I'm just going to adjust these a little bit, bring that out, and then clear the mask, then execute Dynamesh. And then those will be merged together. I'll smooth that back. Take my damn standard brush. Maybe just pick out a couple little details there. And just kind of have fun here. Just pick out little surface details, make a little bit more complexity in the form here. I'm going to pick out some little striations where those muscles come down from the cheekbone and grab onto the corners of the lips. Take the clay tubes brush, build that out again. Maybe fill out some of that hollow in there. I don't want the cheek to go quite so hollow. Let's get that cheekbone build out a little bit more right here. Build that out. Hold down the Alt key, and we can sort of knock back some planes in the cheekbones here. There we go. So we're starting to get more and more character. The nasal aperture is too big, so I'm going to take the move brush and narrow this down. I don't want it to be quite so big, and I kind of want this to be at more of an angle like this. So I'm going to, from the side view, I'm just going to grab these, pull these forward a little bit, and let this come out at more of an angle. Take the move brush, grab this, and bring that forward. And let's build out these lips a little bit. I'm going to take my damn standard brush, just sort of etch out where these lips are going to be. Take my inflate brush, B-I-N for inflate, and just give a little bit more volume to the lips here. Take my move brush and just correct any kind of meandering lines there. There we go. And on the underside here, I'm just going to hit that with a little bit of inflate. And then we'll go back to our clay tubes brush and just do a little, hold on the Alt key and just do a little bit of planing here. Build this out a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to come back, still not happy with this relationship between the face and the rest of the head. So I'm going to take the move brush and just sort of pull some of these shapes out. Turn my draw size down, pull this out. Turn perspective off. And I just want to get a sense of there being cranial mass back there. I feel like we're losing a little bit of mass in the skull. So I'm just going to adjust that with the move brush. And then I'm going to take the clay tubes brush, hold down the Alt key, and just knock back a little bit of a plane here. Take my move brush and just adjust these cheekbones, bring them down a little bit from the front and out. Bring them forward. And I want to get that little zigzag in the cheekbone. I'm going to mask those eyes. Once again, I want to protect the eyes while I mess around with the brow shapes around them. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. Bring this forward. And there we are. Something like that. Clear that masking. And let's go ahead and slice. Like I said, we were just going to do a bust here. So I'm going to slice right here. So what I'll do is I will go to B for brush, T for trim. And we'll try to do this with the trim circle. So I'll bring my two dots together, Control, Shift, click and drag. And actually I need to do one that goes from the center. So let's let that finish and then we'll undo it. Control Z to undo that, Control Shift, and then I'll hit the circle stroke here. Now you'll notice that these two buttons right here under the stroke control, I'll turn on square and center. Now when I bring the two dots together, that circle grows from the center. So now I can move this up and I can slice just here. So now it's going to slice that mesh and it should take away everything. Well, no, we've got to undo and redo it. So I've got to bring these two together and this time move it up and I will hold down the Alt key. Sometimes it can be a little unpredictable with the way the trim brush evaluates the surface. You see there, it's just going to do the same thing on both sides. It's just going to knock out this area. So what I'll do is I'll go to B for brush, T for trim, and we'll do trim lasso. So I'm just going to do a trim brush like this. Hold down the Alt key. And we'll do this and see if we can't knock that out like so. There we go. Now, this is currently symmetrical, so what I want to do is I want to just mirror this across before we start to introduce some asymmetry because that cut is not symmetrical. So I'll go to Geometry, Modify Topology, turn on my floor plane, turn on the X plane here, go to Draw, make sure that is sitting at 0, and then I will click Mirror and Weld, and it will mirror and weld across the X-axis like that. So that just gives us a nice clean cut line there for the bust. So I'll turn the floor plane off, turn perspective back on, and we don't need to re-dynamesh that. It will, we haven't added any geometry per se, we've just mirrored it across. So we'll take our clay tubes brush, and I'm just going to reintroduce some of the detail here, that pectoralis muscle, that deltoid coming over that, getting those heads of that deltoid there. Come around towards the back. We haven't done a lot on the back. Let's bring those scapulas down. Let's build up that neck a little bit. And let's bring the trapezius muscle here back around. So it's wrapping around and grabbing the shoulders here. I'm going to hold down the Alt key with my clay tubes brush so I can sort of knock back a plane here. So to give us a little bit more volume in this neck. And I can take the move brush here and I can just very aggressively kind of expand that neck out. From the side view, I'll mask out the jaw and the skull because I don't really want to affect these parts here. but I would like to change the relationship with the neck here. Let's turn perspective off, take our move brush, and let's just give a little bit more width to this neck. Take a look from the front. Turn on perspective, and then we'll just execute Dynamesh. And we'll take our clay tubes brush and just fill out some of that area there. Now from here, I'm going to take the move brush and just pull where the trachea would be. Just pull that forward, holding down the Alt key so I can just pull straight out there. Bring that jaw out. I'm going to give a little bit of an arc to these sort of striations on the head here. Now it's starting to feel a bit more interesting. Let's take the move brush, so it's doing a quick save right now. When that quick save is completed, I'll take the move brush and just revisit the eye sockets. So again, I want to reiterate that I don't stay on one particular area and sculpt one particular area for an extended period of time. And I think the sooner you kind of get accustomed to that, moving around the object and working the object or the creature as a whole, you're going to find that you're a lot more, it's going to be a lot easier for you to sort of work out shapes and resolve things all at the same time. I'm going to smooth out some of that area in the eye socket there. It's a little too noisy. Smooth all that out. Take the standard brush with alpha 1, and I'm going to just build up that edge to that eye socket. Maybe knock that back, holding down the Alt key to get a little bit more depth in there. And I really want to push this, so let's put a little bit more depth right here. And I'm going to take the move brush and just adjust the shapes of that eyelid. There we go. And I feel like looking at the face from the underside, it might have gone a little bit flat. So I'm going to take my move brush, turn my draw size up, and just sort of pull that brow out a little bit. And don't worry about messing around with the straight line of the horn. We can fix that easily. The important thing is that we just get that profile dynamic and working. So that already feels a bit better. I'm going to just smooth back some of this eye socket area, take my clay tubes brush, fill into here, smooth all this area out, and then let's go back to our eyeballs. Let's grab the eyeballs and bring them forward with the transpose gizmo. There we go. And let's go back to the head, turn on transparency, and I'm just going to use the clay tubes brush to create kind of a socket behind those eyes. And I'm going to try something. I might just make these eyes sit in this kind of real haunting sort of socket like this. Take the standard brush with alpha 1 and we'll kind of build up a little bit of texture around that. So it's like there's desiccated skin or something in there. We'll go to the damn standard brush, and the damn standard brush is just fantastic for carving out wrinkles. So let's just carve out a little bit of detail here. There we go. And I'll turn off X symmetry, and I'm just going to do a few sort of gestural kind of wrinkles coming out of the mouth area here. Take my move brush, I'll turn X symmetry back on. I just want to fix the corners of that mouth there. There we go. And I'm going to select the teeth, and I want to give the teeth a little bit of character. I'm going to bring a bit of an arch up to these, stretch these down a little bit, and hold down the Alt key with my move brush, and I can kind of pull these teeth out to give them sort of almost a bulge like that. That's quite disturbing. I like that. It's almost shark-like. I'm going to select the lips again, turn off my X symmetry, and I'm just going to put a little bit of asymmetry into this area here. Bring that down. I like this little sag that we're starting to get in those eye bags there. Turn our X symmetry back on and go to our damn standard brush, and I'm just going to punch up some of these striations through here. I like how this is almost taking on almost like a crustacean or seashell quality, this sort of crown that this creature is wearing, or that's growing out of this creature's head. Maybe we'll run some striations up this length here. And this could always be smoothed away. It's just seeing how this works. It might work out, I might erase it. So we don't have to kind of be married to any particular idea. We can explore things here and have fun with it. Have fun exploring what this creature could be. I sound like the Bob Ross of ZBrush. Happy monster. Have fun exploring. But really, just kind of just not, don't stress too much about it, and realize you can always undo. You can always go back to a previous save. So have some fun seeing what ideas you can come up with here. I really like at this stage just using this damn standard brush to kind of carve out some real gestural sort of shapes here, seeing how things might flow. Do a little bit of wrinkling back here. We'll revisit that, but I'm just, like I said, I'm just sort of sketching out ideas. Take my clay tubes brush. I'm just going to build up that jawline, that angle there. Let's build all this up. Hold down the Alt key and just knock back a plane there. There we go. So we're starting to get there. Now as I'm working, it might be neat to change the material in these eyes. I'm going to select those eyes. I'm going to go to my material menu here. Now, the material here, I have set to basic material 2. Now, the first time you open ZBrush, it's entirely possible that you would have a different material. You might have red wax selected. If you want to change your material, you just click here and select any material you like. I suggest using basic material 2. And when I have that material selected, I always go to save as startup material the first time I load a new ZBrush, meaning like if you have installed ZBrush for the first time, click save as startup material. And that means that basic material 2 will be the material that's loaded every time you start ZBrush, instead of whatever other material is defaulting to the default material. So if I select this and then go to toy plastic, you see the material changes in the entire object. The eyes are currently selected. I'm going to turn on M for material and go to color, fill object. And that just filled the eyes with that toy plastic material. Now I'm going to change back to basic material 2. And we'll see that on our creature. But we're currently editing the toy plastic material. I'm going to go to the material menu here and open up modifiers. I'm going to turn specular up so the eyes are, oops, I'm on the wrong material. Make sure that you have basic material, toy plastic selected. Go to the material menu, turn your specular all the way up if it's not already, and then go to gel shading. Should be right down here, gel shading, and we can set that to maybe 2 or 3, sort of one of those. Let's set it to 2. And it's showing up on the body, but the important thing is that we've got it on the eyes here. So now I'm going to fill the eyes with a color. So I'm going to select kind of a off yellowish color. Go to MRGB, go to color, fill object. So I've now filled those eyes with that yellow material, that yellow color and that material. So now if I switch back to basic material 2, change my color back to white. Now those eyes look transparent, translucent. They've got this real creepy kind of quality to them. So it will give us a little bit more of a sense of character as we're working. Now, if I want to make sure that the material doesn't change on the body, I've got basic material 2 selected. I'll turn on material and go to color, fill object. Oops, undo. I'm still on the eyes. Alt click on the body and then go to color, fill object. So now the body has been filled with basic material 2. So now if I go back to the eyes, Alt click on those. If I want to select the material that's on here, click my material swatch, drag it over, and let go when you're over the eyes, and now you see you've switched to the material that's on the eyes. So maybe I want to change that color. If I want to sample the color, I click from the swatch, drag over to the eyes, and that will select the color that's on the eyes. So maybe I could darken that a little bit. Go to RGB, color, fill object. So then that fills the eyes with that darker color. So let's go ahead and switch back to white, and you see the teeth come back to their normal color. Switch back to basic material 2. The teeth don't have a material assigned to them. That's why every time I change material, the teeth will change the apparent material. We talk more about that in our chapter on materials, but I just wanted to put a little something into the eyes there, so we get a little something to identify with. So if I wanted to get even more elaborate with it, we could paint a little gradient here on the surface of the eye. So if I alt-click on the eye to select it, let's sample this color. Let's lighten it a little bit. Go to RGB, color, fill object. Now I'm going to darken it. I'm going to take my standard brush, B for brush, S for standard, select the standard brush. Alpha 1, but watch this. We'll turn off Z-Add and turn on RGB. So the brush is no longer sculpting. It's going to be a paintbrush now. I'm going to turn my focal shift down, and it's going to paint this color. So watch what happens when I start to paint on here. I can create this sort of iris. Now, if I undo that, turn on Z-Add, switch my color, hold down the Alt key, I can subtract with my sculpting and paint at the same time. So I've just sort of created an indentation in that eye and added that color to it. If I were to darken this color even more, let's switch this and darken it even more. And I'm switched it so the color is on this side, because when I hold down the Alt key, that's the color that's added. So I could put in a pupil like that. Now we're seeing the body now. I've pushed that eye in so far I can see the eyelet, the mesh underneath it. So I'll just alt-click on the body to select that Z tool, turn off RGB, go to my standard brush, make sure Z-Add is turned on, switch back to white, and then I can just hold down the Alt key and I can push those faces in. So now we've got this sort of pupils in there, and that's a pretty wicked looking eye now. So if I go back to the materials for toy plastic, if I go to my material settings, I can change that gel shading, maybe turn it up to 3. You see we get these variations in the shading. So there's gel shading 1. That gives us a slightly different look. Now if I want to change the highlight position, I go to the light menu here and just move my light, and the highlight on those eyes will update. So let's go ahead and switch back to our basic material 2. Alt-click on the head, make sure that that's our active tool, and then we're going to carry on sculpting. I'm going to go back to my damn standard brush, turn off X symmetry. I'm just going to do, like I said, some quick gestural kind of strokes through here. Just getting an idea of where there might be wrinkles, like this, folds. It's very much like gesture drawing. I'm just doing quick and bold strokes. When I get far away from the center line of the body, I can turn my X symmetry back on, because you're not going to be able to look at the shoulders and recognize the same wrinkle pattern on 2 shoulders, because you can't really see both shoulders at the same time. But here at the neck, where these wrinkles would come together and meet, that would become quite obvious if you had too much symmetry there. So let's turn off our symmetry, put some wrinkles through here. Oops, that's too strong. I'm going to undo that. And just get some nice muscle striations through here. There you go. You see that surface is starting to kind of come to life now with more details. So there we go. Turn our X symmetry on, and we'll just do a little bit of surface detailing here, and then we can smooth some of this stuff back. Take our clay tubes brush, no alpha, Just sort of build up some of that transition up into the underside of that cheekbone. And I don't want quite so much of a snarl. I'm going to bring those lips down just a little bit. Maybe get a little bit of gravity there in the corners of the mouth. There we go. And let's see what happens if we bring these eyelids out a little bit and hood that eye a little bit more. That's a little comical, so I'm going to undo that. So let's undo that. And let's get a little bit of a sharper angle here. Just moving these pieces and parts around. And I want to get in the silhouette. Just want to get that bulge right there of the maxilla. I might select the teeth, alt-click on the teeth and go back to my gizmo and just adjust that tooth position. Maybe I'll bring those dentals forward a little bit more. Maybe just slightly change their angle so they're sort of matching up a little bit better to where they would be in the skull. Alt-click on the head, and then we'll just adjust the lips to match that a bit better. Bring these out. Do a little bit of smoothing here. There we go. So I'm going to go back to these eyes, and I'm going to switch color, and I'm going to go to RGB, color, fill objects. I'm finding them a little bit distracting. So there we go. Now that feels a little bit more inhuman and a little more disturbing, those dark eyes like that. Go to my clay tubes brush again. Just start to fill in that shadow area. Take my damn standard brush and we'll just grab some little bits of shadow here just by picking out little bits here, grabbing little bits of shadow like that. There we go. Now I would like to actually extend these points. So I'm going to go to my masking tools here, and I'm going to go to mask lasso, and I'm just going to mask these out using the lasso tool, invert the mask, go to the gizmo, turn off X symmetry, go to the unmasked mesh center, and let's see if we can't extend these out a little bit. If I were to hold down the Alt key, I could sort of expand them out like that, but that's definitely not what I'm looking for. So I'm going to take the transpose gizmo and just do them two at a time like this. So I'm going to go to the unmasked mesh center. We'll turn on X symmetry, go to unmasked mesh center, and then pull these straight out like this. Clear that mask. And then we'll mask this, invert, go to the unmasked mesh center. Now this time, I need to rotate this so the axis is running along the axis I want to move. So I'll hold down the Alt key, drag that like this, click and drag. So I'm just sort of extending these out. There we go. And I think I could probably extend these a little bit further as well. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to hold down the Alt key. Oops, hold down the Alt key and then adjust that so it's running right down that axis. Turn off the perspective and it'll be easier to see. And then we can just pull those out. I want that to be quite a majestic kind of crown. So that's pretty cool. And that was unintentional, this little step here, but I actually kind of like that. So we'll keep that. I'll take my move brush, just this, and let's accentuate that. I'll go to B for brush, T for trim, D for dynamic. And I'll use my trim dynamic brush to kind of sharpen that sort of plane change right there. There we go. And let's execute Dynamesh. We haven't Dynameshed in a while. So zoom back out of that and starting to get there. It's starting to come together. So take the move brush, pull these down a little bit, Still looking for just the right facial expression. I don't want too much of a snarl, but I do want to give what we call sort of malicious intent. I want it to read like it doesn't have your best interests in heart, but I don't want it to look like it's just like perpetually snarling. A bit of a grin might even be nice and disturbing too. So we can tinker with that a bit later. So I'm going to go to this area here, behind the jaw and under the ear, and I want to fill that out because there actually should be a little bit more mass there where those muscles are grabbing on to the mastoid process of the skull. And these neck muscles come down here. And I'm not worried about overwriting those wrinkles because they were just sketches. Go back to my damn standard brush and just turn my X symmetry off and just break that up with a few more sort of sketchy lines that we can resolve a bit more later. Turn my X symmetry back on, just get this sort of pillars of the neck muscles back here. Take my move brush and just bring that occipital back again on the skull. There we go. And I'm going to hold down the control key. I'm going to mask out this area of the mouth. So let's change from our lasso back to our pen. And I'm just going to manually mask this area out. And I just want to give a little bit more distance between the bottom of the jaw there and the corner of the mouth, because it was riding a little too close. So my autosaves are taking a bit of time because it's saving my undo history with them. So I might actually turn off the undo history, because that is one downside of saving your undo history, is it will really increase the amount of time it takes to save your files, and it vastly increases the size of your files. So let's go to File and turn off undo history. So now I'll just extend this down a little bit. I want to bring those cheeks in a little bit like that. There we go. Clear my mask. Just sort of play around with that nasal shape there. There we go. And I'm going to take my damn standard brush, just do a little bit of extra shape down here where those eyes are sitting kind of inside those weird little open sockets. There we go. There we go. Just picking out a little bit more interesting details. And I'm just looking at my creature from silhouette here and pulling the shape out. Maybe bring that back to a bit of a point. Bring that chin back out. Nice sort of angle to this. And maybe I'll bring these back just a bit like that. There we go. So let's go ahead and save our work. Control S, and our save should actually go faster this time because we're not going to be saving the undo history. So 008. And let me maximize my ZBrush interface again here. There we go. So let's take advantage of the fact that you can move around your object very easily, and we can re-sculpt areas looking at them from the top and from the bottom, using that ability to see your creature from sort of points of view that if this were a physical sculpture, it'd be a little harder to see. You'd have to get down on the floor to get to this view. But here it's very, very easy, and I can see, well, I need to bring that pectoralis muscle back a little bit and bring that deltoid forward. take the clay tubes brush here, sort of fill out that transition like there is a little bit of skin over this. We don't want it just to be pure muscle there. We want it to feel like there is skin running over these areas. There we go. And I'm just going to press the shift key and just do a little bit of smoothing through here, just knocking back some of that detail. Because none of this is supposed to be permanent. You know, it's always my intention when I'm sketching these types of lines in that I'll smooth them back and reintroduce them and build up layer by layer, bit by bit, until I've got the surface the way I want it. I want to fill in that little hollow there. It's a little too deep. So I'm just using my clay tubes brush just to build into that recessed area. And there we go. Execute Dynamesh and save.